British, August 8, 1945. Karasaki Prefecture, eastern Honshu. The mountains were lined with artillery batteries we could count, the coastlines fortified with steel obstacles we could see, the cities filled with trained militia we could fight, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared the sacred empire for the artificial sun that split the heavens and turned human shadows into permanent stains on stone walls. Lieutenant Akiko Yamashita had served as the chief meteorological observer at the Karasaki Weather Station for 3 years, tracking American bomber formations with the precision that had kept her city's defenses one step ahead of destruction. On this humid August morning, her instruments recorded what should have been aerodynamically impossible. At exactly 9:47 a.m., a single enemy aircraft appeared over the industrial district, not the dreaded formations of 200 to 300 B-29 Superfortresses that had been systematically incinerating Japanese cities, but one lone bomber flying at 29,500 feet altitude. Through her high-powered observation scope, Lieutenant Yamashita watched as the aircraft released what appeared to be a single object no larger than a conventional bomb. No incendiary cluster bomb scattered across the residential quarters. No high-explosive ordnance targeted the Mitsuoka steelworks or the Karasaki naval shipyards. Instead, at precisely 1,847 feet above the Shinmachi commercial district, a light more brilliant than 1,000 suns erupted in the morning sky, followed by a pressure wave that shattered her weather station windows 8 miles away and registered 6.1 on the Richter scale at monitoring stations across 3 prefectures. In 4.7 seconds, a thriving city of 390,000 souls simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. What Lieutenant Yamashita had witnessed, what no military observer in human history had ever recorded, was the practical application of theoretical physics transformed into the most devastating weapon ever conceived. The Manhattan Engineering Project, operating under the joint direction of theoretical physicist Dr. Julius Robert Oppenheimer and Military Director General Kenneth Nichols, had spent 39 months and $2.7 billion creating something that existed previously only in the calculations of nuclear scientists. A weapon that harnessed the fundamental binding forces that hold atomic nuclei together. The Fat Man plutonium implosion device carried aboard the B-29 boxcar by Major Charles Sweeney contained the explosive equivalent of 22,000 tons of TNT, compressed into a spherical device measuring just 10 feet 8 inches in length and weighing 10,300 pounds. Unlike conventional explosives that rely on chemical reactions between molecules, this weapon achieved nuclear fission, the splitting of plutonium-239 atoms that releases the same energy that powers stellar fusion in distant stars. The temperature at the hypocenter reached 540,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the first millisecond, 27 times hotter than the surface of the sun. The resulting fireball expanded to 1,200 feet in diameter, vaporizing everything within a half-mile radius and generating thermal radiation that could blind observers 10 miles away. The electromagnetic pulse disabled every electrical device within a 15-mile radius, while the mushroom cloud rose to 43,000 feet into the stratosphere, visible from 200 miles away. But the weapon's true revolutionary nature lay not in its physical destruction, but in what it represented. Humanity had learned to weaponize the forces that create and destroy stars. Since February 1945, Japan's Supreme War Council under Field Marshal Hajime Sugiyama had implemented Operation Hongoku Boso, the most comprehensive homeland defense strategy ever devised by a modern military. Every beach suitable for amphibious assault bristled with reinforced concrete dragon's teeth, steel tetrahedrons, and buried naval mines. Every mountain pass concealed interconnected artillery positions with overlapping fields of fire. Every village, town, and city had organized civilian resistance units armed with explosive charges, Molotov cocktails, and sharpened bamboo spears. According to declassified Imperial Army planning documents captured after the surrender, Japan had deployed 3.2 million regular military personnel, 4.8 million civilian militia members, and 32 million armed civilian volunteers across the 4 main islands. The anticipated invasion zones on Kyushu alone contained 16 full infantry divisions, 4 armored brigades, and 9 independent mixed combat units, representing the largest concentration of defensive military power in recorded history. General Kuniaki Koiso, Japan's prime minister and former commander of the Korean Army, had personally inspected the coastal fortifications in July 1945. His private war diary, discovered in 1952, revealed absolute confidence in Japan's ability to inflict catastrophic casualties on any invasion force. The Americans will find every rice field a killing ground, every village a fortress, every citizen a soldier prepared to die for the emperor. We estimate 500,000 enemy casualties in the first month alone. British-American Joint Chiefs of Staff assessments, based on intelligence gathered from captured Japanese officers and decoded communications, projected that Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands, would result in 400,000 to 800,000 Allied casualties and potentially 5 to 10 million Japanese military and civilian deaths. President Harry S. Truman had been briefed that the invasion could continue into 1947, with American casualties potentially exceeding all previous Pacific Theater losses combined. But Japan's military leadership, despite their meticulous conventional preparations, were planning for a war that technological advancement had already made obsolete. The atomic bombs represented scientific achievements so far beyond conventional weapons technology that even America's closest wartime allies, Britain, Canada, and Australia, had been excluded from most technical details. While Japan's finest military engineers worked with explosive devices measured in pounds and kilograms, American nuclear physicists at the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory had unlocked nuclear chain reactions that released energy measured in kilotons, thousands of tons of TNT equivalent from devices weighing less than 5 tons. Dr. Yoshio Nishina, director of Japan's Atomic Energy Research Program at the Institute of Physical and Chemical Research, had been investigating nuclear fission since 1940 under the code name NIGO Project. His team of 73 scientists and engineers, working with primitive cyclotron equipment and limited uranium supplies, had calculated that constructing a single atomic weapon would require Japan's entire electrical power output for 18 months, resources that the blockaded nation could not possibly allocate to theoretical weapons research. What Dr. Nishina's team never comprehended was the sheer industrial scale of America's atomic weapons program. The Manhattan Project employed 130,000 workers across 30 secret facilities in 19 states. The gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, alone consumed more electricity than most entire countries. The plutonium production reactors at Hanford, Washington, represented the largest construction project in American history, producing weapons-grade plutonium in quantities that Japan's scientists had deemed theoretically impossible. The Fat Man bomb utilized an implosion design of unprecedented complexity. 32 precisely shaped conventional explosive lenses, each machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch, simultaneously compressed a hollow sphere of plutonium-239 to critical mass in less than a microsecond.
The timing had to be perfect within nanoseconds. If even one explosive lens detonated a fraction of a second early or late, the weapon would fizzle and produce minimal nuclear yield. The sophistication extended beyond the weapon itself. The B-29 boxcar had been extensively modified with specialized radar equipment, reinforced bomb bay mechanisms, and additional fuel tanks for the 3,500-mile round-trip mission from Tinian Island. The bomber crew had trained for 8 months using dummy pumpkin bombs filled with conventional explosives, practicing precision drops from extreme altitudes while wearing lead-lined flight suits to protect against radiation exposure. Captain Kermit Beon, the bombardier aboard Boxcar, later testified that the targeting system represented technology years ahead of conventional bombing equipment. The Norden bomb site had been modified with additional gyroscopic stabilizers and radar altimetry equipment, allowing precise weapon release calculations even through cloud cover, capabilities that Japanese anti-aircraft commanders had never encountered. Major Satoshi Nakamura had commanded the Karasaki Air Defense Command since 1943, coordinating anti-aircraft batteries, fighter squadron deployments, and civilian evacuation procedures through 47 previous American bombing raids. His command bunker, constructed 15 feet underground with 3-foot-thick reinforced concrete walls, had been designed to withstand direct hits from 2,000-pound conventional bombs. At 9:47 a.m. on August 8, 1945, Major Nakamura was reviewing fighter deployment schedules when the atomic blast wave reached his position 4.2 miles from ground zero. "The earth moved like liquid beneath my feet," he later testified to American interrogators. "The concrete walls cracked like eggshells. Every electric light exploded simultaneously. My communication equipment began smoking, then burst into flames. Through the ventilation shaft, I could see a light brighter than welding torches, but it filled the entire sky. When I finally reached the surface, I found that Karasaki, where I had been born, where my ancestors had lived for 300 years, had simply vanished." Dr. Emiko Tanaka, chief medical officer at Karasaki General Hospital, survived because she had been conducting surgery in the hospital's basement operating theater when the weapon detonated 2,100 meters away. Her medical journal, recovered 6 months later from the hospital ruins, documented the immediate aftermath. "At first, I thought enemy bombers had struck the hospital with incendiary weapons. The basement filled with smoke, and I could hear screaming from the floors above. But when I climbed the emergency stairs, I discovered that the floors above no longer existed. The entire 6-story hospital had been reduced to twisted metal and concrete rubble. Patients who were in surgery on the 3rd floor had simply disappeared, not killed, but vaporized."
The Karasaki Municipal Weather Station, located 6.8 miles southwest of the hypocenter, recorded atmospheric conditions that defied meteorological science. Temperature sensors detected ambient air temperature rising from 28 degrees Celsius to over 3,000 degrees Celsius in less than 2 seconds, followed by wind velocities exceeding 600 miles per hour. The station's barometric pressure instruments registered a pressure wave equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane, but moving at supersonic speed. Seismograph equipment at the Karasaki University Geology Department, 4.1 miles from ground zero, recorded ground motion consistent with a magnitude 6.4 earthquake, despite the absence of any tectonic activity. The seismic signature was unlike anything previously recorded: a sharp, instantaneous shock wave, followed by prolonged ground vibration that continued for 47 minutes. Of the city's 89,000 buildings, 78,000 were completely destroyed or severely damaged beyond repair. The Karasaki Imperial Castle, headquarters of the Eastern Defense Command, and a structure that had survived earthquakes, fires, and 2 previous centuries of warfare, was obliterated so completely that investigators couldn't locate foundation stones.
The entire Eastern Defense Command staff, 127 officers and 1,400 enlisted personnel, died instantly, severing military communications between Tokyo and 3 prefectures. Captain Hiroshi Watanabe, pilot of a reconnaissance aircraft en route from Yokohama to Sendai, witnessed the atomic explosion from 85 miles away. His flight log, preserved in Japanese military aviation archives, recorded 0947 hours, observed brilliant flash of light from bearing 127 degrees. Initially assumed enemy aircraft were dropping illumination flares, but intensity increased rather than decreased. Light became brighter than sun, causing temporary blindness even through tinted goggles. Observed mushroom-shaped cloud formation, rising to estimated 40,000 feet altitude. Cloud continued expanding for approximately 12 minutes. Radio communication with Karasaki Air Control ceased at 0948 hours and has not resumed. The Karasaki-Tokyo Railroad line, critical for military supply transport, suffered catastrophic damage. The main station, which had handled 15,000 passengers daily and served as a major freight hub for military equipment, was completely destroyed. 7 trains were operating within the city limits when the bomb detonated. 3 passenger trains carrying 892 civilians, 2 military supply trains loaded with ammunition and fuel, and 2 freight trains transporting rice and medical supplies to northern military bases. No survivors were found on any of these trains. Japan's Civil Defense Corps, under the command of Colonel Kenji Matsumoto, had trained 78,000 volunteers in fire suppression, medical aid, and damage assessment techniques. These volunteers had successfully responded to 43 previous conventional bombing attacks, saving thousands of civilian lives and minimizing infrastructure damage. But the Karasaki civil defense teams found themselves confronting destruction that rendered their training completely useless. Fire Chief Ryuji Sasaki had prepared his department of 9,400 firefighters and 240 pieces of equipment for the massive incendiary raids that had devastated other Japanese cities. His firefighting strategy relied on rapid response teams, coordinated water distribution from the Shinano River, and systematic evacuation of endangered civilian populations. Within minutes of the atomic blast, Chief Sasaki realized that conventional firefighting had become impossible. The fires burned substances that should not burn, he reported to surviving prefectural authorities. Steel beams glowed white-hot. Concrete exploded like gunpowder. The Shinano River itself seemed to boil. I watched fish floating to the surface, cooked by water that had become scalding in seconds. My firefighting equipment melted before we could deploy it. Fire hoses disintegrated when they contacted surfaces heated beyond 1,000 degrees. We had trained to fight fires, not to fight the sun brought to earth. Military communications networks designed to survive conventional bombing through redundant telephone lines, radio relay stations, and telegraph systems failed catastrophically. The Eastern Defense Command Communication Center operated 640 phone lines, connecting 47 military installations, 28 radio transmitters with ranges up to 300 miles, and 15 telegraph stations capable of handling classified military traffic. The atomic bomb's electromagnetic pulse destroyed every electronic device within a 12-mile radius instantly, while thermal radiation melted copper wire and steel relay equipment throughout the city. For 8 hours and 23 minutes, Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo received only static when attempting to contact Karasaki. Communications officers initially assumed that American conventional bombing had damaged radio equipment,
but reconnaissance aircraft reports soon revealed a catastrophe beyond conventional understanding. Lieutenant Colonel Jiro Yamamoto, Deputy Chief of Imperial Communications, attempted to re-establish contact using backup radio equipment from neighboring prefectures. His official report, filed on August 9, stated, "Standard communication protocols have proven inadequate. The city of Karasaki appears to have suffered damage consistent with being struck by approximately 3,000 conventional bombs simultaneously, but reconnaissance aircraft report only a single enemy bomber over the target area, requesting immediate clarification from Intelligence Division regarding American bombing capabilities."
Captain Nobuo Fujiwara, commander of the Karasaki Harbor Defense Force, had positioned 47 anti-aircraft guns, 23 searchlight batteries, and 15 radar installations to protect the city's vital shipbuilding facilities. His defensive network had successfully engaged American bombers in 12 previous attacks, downing 6 enemy aircraft and forcing bombing formations to higher, less accurate altitudes. When the boxcar appeared on radar screens at 9:43 a.m., Captain Fujiwara's batteries tracked the aircraft according to standard procedures. The bomber flew too high for effective anti-aircraft fire and appeared to be conducting reconnaissance rather than attacking. "We observed the aircraft release a single object," Captain Fujiwara later testified. "Our radar operators assumed it was a reconnaissance camera or weather monitoring device. No one imagined that a single bomb could destroy what required 300 aircraft to accomplish in other cities." The Japanese Navy's experimental radar station at Mount Asama, 47 miles north of Karasaki, detected the atomic explosion as an enormous radar signature that overloaded their equipment. Technical Officer Warrant Officer Keisuke Sato recorded in his log, 0947 hours, detected massive radar return from Karasaki vicinity. Signal strength exceeded maximum measurable parameters. All radar equipment in direction finding section damaged by electronic surge. Cause unknown. No weather phenomena could generate signal of this magnitude. General Korochika Anami, Japan's war minister and architect of the Homeland Defense Strategy, received his first fragmentary reports about Karasaki at 1:15 p.m., nearly 4 hours after the attack. Initial communications from surviving military units described massive air raid damage and unprecedented fire casualties, but these reports seemed consistent with the firestorm attacks that had destroyed Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka. What gradually emerged through scattered survivor testimonies and reconnaissance aircraft observations was something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of warfare itself. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, the naval aviator who had commanded the Pearl Harbor attack, flew a reconnaissance mission over Karasaki at 3:30 p.m. His radio transmission to naval headquarters was recorded by multiple listening posts. "Where Karasaki stood this morning, there is now only a brown scar on the earth, like the footprint of some terrible god. The destruction extends in perfect circles, as if a giant had pressed a burning coin against the landscape. I can find no intact buildings, no recognizable streets, no signs that 390,000 people lived here yesterday." Dr. Yoshio Nishina, Japan's leading nuclear physicist, was summoned to an emergency meeting of the Supreme War Council at 6 p.m. Based on preliminary reports and his theoretical knowledge of atomic physics, Dr. Nishina presented a possibility that horrified Japan's military leadership. The Americans had successfully weaponized nuclear fission. "If my calculations are correct," Dr. Nishina reported, "a single atomic bomb contains explosive power equivalent to 20,000 tons of conventional explosives. The thermal radiation would create temperatures approaching those found in stellar interiors. The radioactive contamination would render the target area uninhabitable for decades. Most critically,
If the Americans possess one such weapon, they likely possess multiple weapons and the industrial capacity to manufacture more. Emperor Hirohito, briefed on the situation at 8:45 p.m., asked the question that defined Japan's crisis. How many of our cities could withstand such weapons? The answer, provided by General Anami after consultation with civil defense officials, was stark. None, Your Majesty. No defensive measures exist against weapons of this type. Intelligence reports from Japanese agents in neutral countries began arriving throughout the evening, confirming that American President Harry Truman had publicly announced the use of an atomic bomb against Japan. Swiss radio broadcasts, monitored by Japanese communications intercept stations, quoted Truman's statement. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. The implications were staggering. If America possessed atomic weapons in quantity, Japan's carefully constructed homeland defense, the 3.2 million troops, the fortified coastlines, the armed civilian population, all of it became militarily irrelevant when the enemy could transform matter into energy and turn entire cities into atomic shadows. As Emperor Hirohito would soon realize, Japan wasn't facing an invasion they could resist through conventional military tactics.
They were facing a revolution in warfare that made resistance itself a form of national suicide. But the complete scope of what atomic weapons meant for Japan and for human civilization remained to be revealed. The mathematics of nuclear warfare were about to be written not in battlefield casualties or territorial losses, but in the fundamental understanding that some weapons transcend military conflict and threaten the continuation of organized society itself. 3 days later, as radiation sickness began claiming lives among Karasaki's survivors, a second atomic bomb would fall on Nagasaki. The message would become undeniable: surrender immediately or watch Japanese civilization disappear one city at a time, destroyed by weapons that turned the power of stars against human targets. What happened next would force Emperor Hirohito to confront a choice no ruler in history had ever faced: surrender to an enemy whose weapons could literally end Japanese civilization, or continue a war that atomic technology had already decided. The age of conventional warfare was ending. The atomic age, with all its promise and terror, had begun over the ashes of Karasaki. The atomic fire that consumed Karasaki on August 8th had revealed America's most terrifying secret: weapons that could harness the power of stars. But as Emperor Hirohito would soon discover, this was not an isolated demonstration of scientific achievement. It was the opening move in a calculated campaign to force Japan's surrender through the systematic annihilation of Japanese civilization itself. What began with one impossible weapon was about to become a cascade of atomic horror that would redefine the very concept of warfare. August 11, 1945, Nagasaki Prefecture. Dr. Emiko Sasaki, chief radiologist at Nagasaki Medical University, had spent 3 days studying tissue samples and blood specimens from Karasaki survivors transported to her facility. What she discovered defied every principle of medical science she had learned in 15 years of practice. The victims weren't simply burned or injured. Their cellular structure had been fundamentally altered by exposure to forms of radiation that didn't exist in nature. Their white blood cell counts were dropping to 0, she recorded in her classified medical report to the Imperial Health Ministry. Hair falling out in clumps, internal organs beginning to fail, and a strange form of anemia that responded to no known treatment. These people were dying from the inside out, killed by something invisible that continued to kill long after the explosion ended.
At 11:02 a.m., as Dr. Sasaki was documenting the fourth Karasaki victim to die from radiation sickness, Major Charles Sweeney released the second atomic bomb directly above the Urakami Valley. The Fat Man plutonium device detonated at 1,650 feet altitude, generating a fireball that reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit and consumed everything within a mile radius in 0.03 seconds. The Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works, which had produced the torpedoes used at Pearl Harbor, simply evaporated. The Nagasaki Medical University Hospital, where Dr. Sasaki had been treating atomic bomb victims, ceased to exist along with 1,400 patients and medical staff. The ancient Urakami Cathedral, the largest Christian church in Asia, was reduced to scattered stone fragments and melted bronze bells. But the physical destruction was only the beginning of Japan's atomic nightmare. Emperor Hirohito, receiving reports of Nagasaki's obliteration while still processing the incomprehensible destruction of Karasaki, called an emergency session of the Supreme War Council. For the first time in Japanese history, the Divine Emperor faced a military situation that could not be resolved through courage, sacrifice, or strategic brilliance. The Americans had demonstrated the ability to destroy Japanese cities at will, one per day, until nothing remained of the Japanese nation except radioactive ruins. General Korichika Anami, who had spent 4 years preparing Japan's ultimate defense, presented calculations that horrified even the most militant War Council members. At their current rate of atomic attacks, the Americans can destroy every major Japanese city within 6 weeks. Our 3.2 million defenders, our fortified positions, our civilian militia, none of it matters when the enemy can kill 100,000 people with a single aircraft sortie. The psychological impact extended far beyond military calculations. In cities across Japan, civilians who had endured conventional bombing with stoic determination began fleeing urban areas in panic. The randomness of atomic targeting, the impossibility of defense, and the lingering radiation death that claimed victims weeks after exposure created a form of terror that conventional warfare had never produced. Mayor Hiroshi Takahashi of Osaka evacuated his family to rural mountain villages despite official orders to maintain civilian morale. His private diary, discovered decades later, revealed the complete collapse of confidence in Japan's ability to continue the war. How do we fight an enemy who can summon the sun itself as a weapon? Our soldiers are brave, but bravery means nothing against weapons that turn matter into energy. We are not fighting Americans anymore. We are fighting gods.
Atomic weapons create casualties that extend across generations, Dr. Sasaki concluded in her 1960 comprehensive study. Children born to atomic bomb survivors show increased rates of genetic abnormalities. Cancer rates remain elevated decades after exposure. The bombs dropped in August 1945 continue to claim victims 20 years later. Nuclear warfare doesn't simply end wars, it creates wounds in human civilization that persist across generations. British